All right, we're ready.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Anybody not ready? She starts the speech by saying that black women have never been defined as human. This proves that a species isn't focused will be able to solve because it means that we have to necessarily go beyond looking at what necessarily is human, be able to take into consideration what those things are non-human. Queering the non-human is described about our work evidence indicates privatizing the way in which we define what is human and what is non-human, the ways in which some animals, i.e. like dolphins and gorillas, are having the personal debate in the courts, while as people of color and indigenous populations are still being labeled as animals around the world in order to be able to justify their slaughter, extermination, and imprisonment. The only way for us to be able to problematize this is actually be able to focus on the question of how these species are constructed in relation to one another, opposed to just having to focus saying we have a call for mothering. They necessarily created an issue of an absent reference because there is no dog or cat or cow here necessarily to be able to debate. Our Bell and Russell, as well as our Adam Evans, indicates when you just say that humans are animals without necessarily paying attention to the way that these things are categorically defined and having attention to the way to be able to actually have a focus on this and necessarily leaves these things to be able to put on the back burner and effort to actually be able to talk about it so that way they continue to simmer until they end up being cooked. And our Spiegel evidence specifically indicates that a silence on this means that we will never be able to actually question this. The fact that they never question the way in which the development of the oceans necessarily includes things like fishing, and they call for a ban on fishing while they simultaneously celebrate what it means to be a fish necessarily means they do not put a call upon anyone to actually change the consumptive practices that they may actually be able to engage in. We are not prescribing the way you should change your consumptive practices, rather we are saying that you should look internally the way that consumption intersects with the way that you create your own spaces for home. We do not try and erase the way that she creates her role of the ballot or the way that he extends it to 2AC or will extend it to 2AR. Rather, our attempt to necessarily say to do it separately. This is our distinction about what collaboration is versus being coalitions or in solidarity, because we think that people have separate roots in order to be able to go about advancing those causes that they think are important to one another. We think that their root is important. However, our one is necessarily be able to create a collaborative process where we can also be able to figure out which route is the best way without being able to undermine the others. We think our route necessarily doesn't undermine theirs because it means a space for us to be able to talk about the fact that she says that black women have never been human proves that there is a space for ours to be able to take them into consideration, but that does not work the other way around. Those are the conceded links there. She makes the argument that there is an asterisk on trans. However, they do not put an asterisk on what it means to be a woman. That means that an F2M would not necessarily identify as female, which means that when in the 2AC they say that it's specific for trans black women, and women is defined as people who would identify as female, it would necessarily exclude that person who is queer, who is an F to M, who would identify as being male, which means that they do not asterisk enough of their terminology, which is why queering the non/human is the best way to go about doing this. You'll also concede to the link that my partner makes in the 1R about how the way in which your mama is worshipped is by a form of sacrifice that sacrifices non-human animals such as fish and cattle and pigs. These sacrificial links are necessary reason that shows how they sacrifice the non-human the way they do that. They say they're the only ones who are doing queering work. You can circle this on their flow because it proves this is how they create a static definition of queering, because they say they are the only ones who queer, and that when our approach is not queer. There's also proven in the 2AC when they say the 1MC performance is not a queer performance. That proves that they try to create a static definition of what is queer and what is not queer, which means their asterisk is not much of an asterisk whatsoever. And they also continue to say what is woman. We do not say and they continue to do this when they say things like Miguel's performance is not queer. Now the counter permutation. We don't need to win the counter permutation in order to be able to win the round because they have dropped the competing methodologies, which means that they don't get to go for the permutation either, which is not extended in the 1AR. We will win that our methodology is the best way in order to be able to necessarily create a path for us to have it separately. She says that the black women did exist from the Black Power movement. We agree with that. That is exactly what a collaborative effort is, because when they existed separately, because we agree that there are separate spaces that need to be taking place, they didn't say that Black Power should be rejected. Rather, they said that Black Power needs to exist in their own space that they were able to take in order to create a black empowerment for females as a separate space, and then sometimes came together in order to be able to work for the same social goals. This is why when I define collaboration in the 2AC is working for the same goal of total social liberation, opposed to just saying that there's a single route they want to be able to produce. The fact that they say they're the only ones who do this necessarily shows that they are shutting out other routes for people to take place. She says that the people have been doing this for years. However, the Breeze evidence specifically talks about what is being served at tournaments, what do we serve ourselves, and necessarily intrinsic to the part of the fact that there are now vegan and vegetarian offerings at tournaments means there has been a tangible change in the debate community. There's also been a tangible change by the long history of black debaters that have also been able to take place. These changes are both important. For them to say that one should be laughable and should not be taken into consideration and has done absolutely nothing is absolutely not true, because it's necessarily important. Because when I decide to host a tournament without necessarily serving the flesh of dead animals, that necessarily means that the people who are working in factory farms, who are illegal immigrants, and people of color who are being tortured and being hurt by the processes that are being farmed by prison workers, are necessarily something that we do not partake about. This came from my ability to read these forms of literature, which means that the way that I engage in, the way that I take into account is very definitely personal, the way that we go about doing things. One thing that you can do as an individual is register for a tournament as vegetarian, because the tournament will provide for your nutritional needs. You do not need to eat. You can eat whatever you want, but if you register as vegetarian, more vegetarian food will be there. And then if you still eat the flesh, it is up to your own individual choices. But to change the way the debate community functions, people are doing this on a consistent basis. This means that you do not need to prescribe things, and the previous evidence is specifically the way that one can mother the necessary community. And things like CRT existed before speciesism debate. We could be real. People have been talking about race for thousands of generations for a long period of time in the context of debate. Before it was one of the original critiques, along with the CLS critique, which means that the anthro critiques actually came after it.